I hope everyone can hear me. Always texting is a good way to let me know that the mic is on. Good evening and Gemar Chasima Toiva to everybody. It is with great honor and trepidation and humility that I speak to my fellow bereaved parents tonight about my spiritual journey beyond grief, beyond pain and grief. Many thanks to Miriam Greenfield and Chana Dvar Goldberg of our Tapestry for arranging this very special meeting during Aseres Yemei Teshuvah. This is being recorded. We're on Zoom, and anyone can text me questions or comments in the window on the side. God willing, Amir Tashem, time permitting, I will address any and all comments. I will not identify the name of the person who is asking the question. My name is Baruch Cohen. I'm a trial attorney in Los Angeles. I was raised in New York, in Far Rockaway, New York. My parents made Aliyah to Lawrence. And I had the great privilege of learning for many years in the Chafetz Chaim Yeshiva when it was in Queens, when it was in Forest Hills, Queens. 16 years ago, our beautiful 17-year-old daughter, Hindi, was nifter. She died on February 23rd, 2004 at 4:33 p.m. from Ewing's sarcoma, a devastating pediatric cancer, plunging our family into a black hole of darkness. I mentioned the date and time because it is that moment in time that is etched in my life permanently. It's forever etched in my psyche. Hindi was diagnosed with cancer on Tzom Gedalia during Aseres Yemei Teshuvah, a few days after 9/11. In fact, that day, we refer to that day as Ground Zero. And for 2.5 years, we tried to valiantly save her life. But before that, I lived in what I consider to be blissful ignorance. I refused to look at ads in Hamodia and Yated of kids with pediatric oncology. I just couldn't look at it. I was a regular person, untouched by tragedy, untouched by pain. But after we were hit with a devastating diagnosis, we were thrust into this dark world of blood counts and chemotherapy and radiation and a dreaded bone marrow transplant. It's interesting that we believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides the refuah, the cure, before the illness. Prior to being diagnosed with cancer, I had this uncanny desire to crack open a sefer that I never learned in yeshiva, but was sitting on my shelf, called the Chovos Halavavos, specifically the Shar HaBitachon. And this sefer carried me and gave me a source of structure, strength, and direction during the turbulent illness. And there was nothing accidental or surreptitious about it. I believe that Hashem guided my hand to that sefer when I needed it, prior to me needing it, to provide me with the strength to deal with the nisayon before the fact. The pain of being a bereaved parent is unlike any pain on the planet. It's the harshest, most crushing pain I've ever experienced in my life. While my father died several years earlier, and that pain was intense, that's the normal derech hateva. That's the way of the world. Children get to say Kaddish for their parents. But the contrary, the reverse, is not the derech hateva, the way of the world. I was told that in the Torah that there is no defined term for bereaved parents to reflect the anomaly. I mean, we have orphans, Yisoimim, we have widows and almana, but the Torah does not have a defined term for bereaved parents, indicating that it's indeed not the normal way of the world. I mentioned that I learned in the Chofetz Chaim Yeshiva for many years, not just to boast about a resume, but it's very important because notwithstanding a very substantial wealth of years of Torah learning under my belt on a very high level, nevertheless, I was subjected to what I call farkakta hashkafas, things that people ingrained in me somehow under the religious banner, under hashkafa or whatever. And it affected me. And it impeded me. These farkakta hashkafas is what I call, they managed to invade my brain. They invaded my psyche and consciousness. And it actually made my grief more difficult. It compounded my grief. One of the primary stumbling blocks that I faced was guilt. I remember in Los Angeles, every time there was a tragedy or every time that there was a crisis, Rabbanim would get together, they would quote Chazal that says that whenever a terrible tragedy would befall us, we have to be mafashresh b'maisav. We have to analyze our deeds. Well, that somehow put the idea in my head that somehow there was blame or guilt. And I found that bereaved parents often wish that we could have done something differently following the death of our child. That can make us feel guilty. And I found that guilt becomes an integral part of depression, and it's not healthy. I don't feel that way now, but I did initially at ground zero. I found that self-blame is an avoidance coping skill, and it inhibits the healing process. We tend to plague ourselves into thinking that we should have done something differently, and therefore somehow it's our fault, and that it's somehow undeserved guilt. Baruch Hashem, thank God, I was fortunate at a very early stage to read a magnificent book called The Blessings of a Broken Heart by Sherry Mandel. It is truly a masterpiece. And she cautions us to avoid guilt at all costs. I've come to learn that guilt is like stepping off a cliff, tumbling down uncontrollably a steep, greasy ravine to the jagged rocks below. It's virtually impossible to recover and return from it because the incline is too steep and the slippery walls make it virtually impossible to climb back out. I even had a Masorah attributed to the Chazon Ish himself, that nowadays, Bizman Hazeh, and he was talking about his time, we must not attribute wrongdoing or a sin to a tragedy, because we're not, and he says, we're not like the brothers of Yosef, the Shiftika, standing in front of Yosef, being able to pinpoint their harsh treatment by Yosef to the sin of Mechiras Yosef, the sale of Yosef. We don't have prophets, we don't have Nevi'im among us to tell us this. Parenthetically, a fellow bereaved parent who actually learned in the mirror for many years, a substantial Talmud Chacham, he assured me, he said, Baruch, don't worry, Chazal say I could do it, I'm going to do it. I said, Rabbi Yed, I beg you, don't do it. It's not healthy. Well, he said that against my advice, he decided to do it. And he did a cheshbon nefesh, and I told him, Rabbi Yed, you're making a huge mistake, but he did it anyway. Well, subsequently, he admitted it was a destructive analysis. Totally devastating. It was suicidal. I asked him, where do you go with your conclusion? How does this help your life? You're going to plague your soul for the rest of eternity to blame it? How could you do tshuva for something like that? It's a suicidal path to go on. It's the tool of the Yetzer Hara to further demoralize us and to get us to not heal properly. To quote a dear mental health professional who's a close friend, when I actually articulated the thought early in my grief, he said to me smugly, he said, Baruch, you're not that important. God didn't consult with you before he reclaimed your daughter's life. Interestingly, during Shiva, a good friend who's a Rav and a lawyer as well, made an innocent comment to me that truly healed me substantially. He said to me, Baruch, I know you did everything you could to save her. You know, that comment, that innocent comment literally saved me from the path of destructive guilt. A year later, when we did a Hachnasa Sefer Torah in Los Angeles in memory of Hindi, the Stachina Rebbe of Borough Park was in Los Angeles, and he came to me the Shabbos beforehand. And he said something so extraordinary to me. He did a play on words. He told me the Masorah, teaching that his father told him, a play on words of Parsha Shoftim about Egla Arufa, about the corpse that is found outside a city. How the elders of the city say, Ki matzei cholo, when we find a dead body on the road. He said, interestingly, cholo sort of sounds like chola, a sick person. And the Torah says, lo noda mahi kohu. We don't know why he was smitten. The Stachina Rebbe said, indeed, when tragedy hits, we are not in a position to start blaming ourselves and start guilting ourselves and to try to figure out why it happened. Only God, only the Rabbeinu Shalom knows. It's not our job. In fact, the Gemara provides examples of things that are onos devarim, hurtful words. And the Gemara says one may not tell one suffering from afflictions that he's receiving those afflictions due to prior sins, quoting Eov. Don't be like the friends of Eov, who told Eov, you're being punished because of sin A, B, and C. And I try to beg everybody out of Shiva Kol, whenever I hear this Mishagas go on, I please tell them, don't try to suggest to anyone in our situation that they know why the tragedy occurred, or that we were chosen for this mission because of any elevated spiritual status. Personally, I found it maddening, and it was not helpful on my path to healing. What further compounded my grief was cliches. We'll call it from cliches. Replay any Shiva that you've been to. You hear the same comments over and over.
Me too. Was hat das nicht.
Please mute yourself. Laura, please mute participants.
Heilig nehmen.
All right. Can you hear me now? Can see me? Ah, Baruch Hashem. So another cliche that someone said to me is that life would never be the same, and I say to them, maybe life wasn't supposed to be the same. I also mentioned time heals all wounds. Deflated tires don't inflate automatically. You need work. And probably the most maddening comment that people dropped on my lap was, Hashem only gives tests to those who could handle it. And I kept telling people, Hashem is bad aim because I can't handle this test. And I rejected the notion that I'm somehow different. I see there's a comment. Someone said they can't hear me. And I'm sorry about this. I don't know what happened. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you. Someone said it's all good. Can somebody comment whether it's okay? Good. Someone also said to me, there are no words. Well, I took offense to that. Chazal has words for chizuk for everyone. Why should a bereaved parent not have words to console us? So that sort of became my mission, to find the words of Chazal that heal. I discovered a psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman, who wrote a magnificent article about the 3 Ps that stunt our recovery. Personalization, meaning I'm at fault and somehow it's because of me. Pervasiveness, that this tragedy will somehow affect my entire life. And permanence, that the aftershocks of this tragedy will last forever. 3 great rules to be cognizant of. The 3 Ps. They stunt our recovery. And if we're cognizant of it and we're aware of it, we can heal so much better. I also met other bereaved parents who, I guess they ignored the pink elephant in the room. They swept their stuff under the carpet. It's what I call unresolved grief. They ignored it, but yet it remained in the room. And there was no shame in reaching out for direction to channel our grief properly. I also learned at a very early stage that there's no healing properly without grieving properly. It's a 2-step process. During Shiva, people were asking, how's he doing? Well, how should I be doing during Shiva? I needed to be patient. More about that later. But I needed to be patient and calm to watch the healing process begin by grieving properly and allowing the process of grief to manifest. And I tell all the law clerks that I train, there are no shortcuts in life. I say this to my kids as well. There's no express elevator to the penthouse floor of success. Well, that rule applies to grief as well. One cannot be impatient when it comes to healing. Physical wounds, they need time to manifest. And we say in Tehillim that Hashem is the Rofei Lishvurei Leiv. He's the healer of the broken heart. Patience is certainly a virtue on the long road of grief, which is not linear. You think of a ruler from 0 to 12, and you think that by the time you get to 12, well, I graduated because I'm in a better spot. But then all it takes is one trigger, a smell, a scent, a sound, a word, a picture, a familiar situation, and suddenly that remembrance can catapult the griever back to ground zero. So we have to be very, very patient with ourselves because Hashem's healing takes time. The Gemara in Eruvin, by the way, says that anyone who attempts to force the moment and expends great efforts to achieve the objective precisely when he does exactly when he desires it to, well, the moment forces him to, and he's unsuccessful. Yet, conversely, anyone who is patient and yields to the moment stands by his side, and he will ultimately be successful. I mentioned Sherry Mandel's extraordinary book. She was able to identify the grieving process so magnificently. And she observed that grief is truly not permanent. She observed that it morphs. It morphs and it migrates. And she said she went from being pain to having pain. I thought that that was an absolutely extraordinary revelation, that I'm certainly not locked in the grip of pain indefinitely. I was fortunate to go to a Chai Lifeline bereaved parent retreat at Camp Simcha early in my grief. And they really divided the many parents into two groups. The first group was parents whose children died from illness, prolonged illness. The second group were parents whose children died from a tragic accident. What I found fascinating from meeting the parents from both sides was that each side was jealous of the other. Those of us in the first group of parents of children who died from an illness, well, we believe that the parents on the other side were fortunate because there was no suffering. It was a sudden tragedy. And the parents in the other group of the children who died from a catastrophic accident were envious of me because they assumed that I got to say goodbye. How fascinating it is that you could have two types of parents in the same ditch of life, each one thinking that the other might have it easier. But as I said earlier, grief does not stay forever. And it morphs. It changes. I remember one Friday night in shul, the chazan was singing L'Chadaydi. I was in space. I was in my own world of pain, my own universe, oblivious to what was going on, really. When suddenly I was spaced out, basically. When suddenly I zeroed in, I tuned back in to Rav Lochsheves Be'emek HaBocha. Too long have you dwelled in the valley of tears. I thought to myself, wow, maybe that's Hashem's way of jolting me and giving me a wake-up call that it's time for that second wind. Maybe it was a signal from Hashem. And I felt that second wind was integral. That message in a bottle, so to speak. The turning point in my grief were three things. And it came from intense introspection and patience. The first and primary thing that changed the flow of my river was when I was able to get out of my own pain and start focusing on the pain of my wife. This was a transforming moment for me. For months, all I could think of was my pain. The minute I was able to transcend and stop thinking of myself and start incorporating into my prayers for healing how my wife is doing, how my children are doing, that literally elevated me substantially. The second epiphany was when I realized that I wasn't permanently locked in this grief. And the third, realizing the dangers of guilt, that indeed we're not at fault for the tragedy of the death of our children. I mentioned that I'm a trial attorney. I try cases before judges, juries, even Bate Din. And my business is about understanding other people's causes and championing them. I decided I'm going to be my own lawyer to champion my own cause because my adversary was grief. And he became the greatest adversary of my life. And it had a gravitational force of its own. And I could not allow the gravitational pull of that grief to consume me. So I began a collection of articles. I read every Art Scroll Feldheim, every Sefer you could imagine, searching for the right words of Nechama that are there. I compiled a collection called Rabbi Yochanan's Bone Chizuk to the Bereaved Parent. I didn't write it. It's a compilation of what other people wrote. And it was very cathartic. It was very healing. And it deals with the pain of a deceased child, coping and grieving and healing and transcending the tragedy and how to achieve true consolation from Hashem. I found that the words of the Chiddushei Harim of Ger, whose 13 children died on a Shabbos, or the Kloisenberger Rebbe, whose wife and 11 children died in the gas chambers of Auschwitz, they all wrote about their experiences. Or if you know history in Israel, David Hatuel, whose 8-month pregnant wife Tali and his 4 daughters were killed by Arab terrorists. Or Esther Waxman, whose son Corporal Nachshon Waxman was killed by Arab terrorists. Or even former First Lady Barbara Bush, whose daughter Robin died from leukemia. Or how Aaron Cohen dealt with the tragedy of his sons Nadav and Avihu dying by reading how other people coped with their tragedy, which is really the impetus why I'm sharing this tonight. There's an immediate sense of understanding by fellow bereaved parents of what other bereaved parents have gone through and are going through, and how they pulled through it, if you could use such a term. You know, grief is not like a rash that you just put ointment on and it goes away. It's a process. I translated letters from great tzaddikim and Talmidei Chachamim on this very issue. Harav Chatzkel Levenstein, the Chassam Sofer, Yonis Anebeshitz, all on the topic of the impossibly painful test of us bereaved parents, all included in the compendium. That is open to anybody that asks. It's in PDF format. All you have to do is email me, and I'll be happy to share it with you. I can only caution you to load your printer up because it's in excess of 500 pages, but it is extremely healing. I came to realize and develop a comfort level with my grief. No, I'm not happy that I have grief, but I came to grips with it. I realized that in the Arna Kodesh, the broken luchos were on top of the intact luchos, because I believed There's a way to speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through our broken luchos, through our broken tablets. The Kutzker Rebbe said that there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. I came to realize that it's a component of my life. It's not what defines me. But it's a part of my life that I don't negate. I factor it in. And most importantly, I'm aware of the landmines that are in front of me that trigger a spiral downwards. So for example, I don't go to my daughter's cemetery frequently. It's too hard for me. I go 3 times a year on her yahrzeit. I go before the Yom Adin, before Rosh Hashanah, and I go on Tisha B'Av to mark my personal churban. But other than that, because I recognize that it's too hard on me, I don't go because it's too detrimental. It's too harsh on me. And I'm in touch with that, the debilitating effect that it has on me. And because my goal is to stay positive and to serve God b'simcha, given my challenges, that's where I came down on. There's a magnificent sefer that also helped me tremendously. It's called the Gesher HaChaim by Rav Michal Tukachinsky. And in his sefer, he speaks about how the yahrzeit is really a birthday. He says that there are 4 births to a neshama. The first birth is when Hashem plucks the neshama out of the Heichal HaNeshamas, out of the orchard, and designates it and says, you're going to be born in 2019 to these parents and these siblings. And it's a decision from the heavenly orchard. The second birth is when Hashem partners with a husband and the wife to create the embryo. And the third birth is 9 months later when there's a birth. And the fourth birth is when the neshama can actually graduate, having fulfilled its mission to return to God's loving embrace. So as a result of learning the Gesher HaChaim, I don't celebrate or observe my daughter's birthday. I view her yahrzeit as the ultimate birthday where she completed her mission. Also in the Gesher HaChaim, he speaks about 2 embryos in a womb, one a believer, one a not believer. And the non-believer says, you know, this world that we live in, surrounded by amniotic fluid, this is the world that we live in, and that's it. You see what you get. The believing embryo says, no, I believe that these eyes are destined to see great things and learn great things. These ears are destined to hear great Torah and listen to beautiful music and great conversation from a spouse. These legs will take me to great places. And the non-believing embryo said, nonsense. And then the moment of delivery comes, and the believing child, the believing embryo, gives birth first. The non-believing embryo says, Gaval, terrible tragedy. This is the end. When really it's the beginning. The Gesher HaChaim was a game changer. And I urge you all to read it. You can actually get it in English for those of you who desire. Because my goal was to find the right words in the Torah, I started looking at the Torah through the eyes and mindset of a bereaved parent. We all know that as bereaved parents, we perceive things drastically different than other people do. We see things differently. We breathe a different oxygen. So while the Torah might talk about Nadav and Avihu's death and the effect on Aaron HaKohen, other people might go, wow, terrible. But the bereaved parent reads this, and you read the Trup, and you read the Chumash, and you read Makros Gedolos, and you read the Mefarshim, and it takes your breath away. And it's a different effect. So I went out to literally be Marva the Sedra every week and read the Torah every week, Gemaras and Mishnayos, for sources on bereavement, to see how the Torah deals with it, so that I could be one with it. Of significance is a innocent Rashi at the end of Parshas Bereshis. Right before the flood, right before the Mabul. When Hashem saw that mankind was wicked, the Torah says, Vayinochem Hashem, ki asa es ha'adam ba'aretz vayisyatze ve'livo. That Hashem saw mankind wicked, and that Hashem was comforted. Vayinochem, he was comforted that he made man, and he grieved in his heart. Rashi says that the thoughts of God turned from the attribute of mercy, the midas hachesed, to the attribute of justice, midas hadin. That he reconsidered his decision to create the world. Rashi says that whenever the Torah uses the word nechama, it means to reconsider what to do. And that when we can change our mindset, when we're able to move from viewing what happened as the worst tragedy, and it is, and the darkest point of our life, to recognize that it was ultimately Hashem's will and desire that is ultimately good, we can achieve nechama. You know, when I was sitting Shiva, I said to myself, there is no way I will ever smile again. There's no way I'll ever laugh again. There's no way I'll ever have simcha again. And had you told me, or had anyone told me during Shiva, Baruch C, there will come a day, and you will, I would have said, you're nuts. Impossible. But that day has come. After many years of hard work, attending groups for bereaved parents, humbling myself to learn the writings of others, and of course realizing that it's not all about me. Being wrapped in my own grief was isolating me from everyone. My road eventually came to simcha mitoch tzara, carving out happiness from tragedy, and it's possible. And the Mesilas Yesharim in the Midas Hanakiyas specifically addresses this ability. He writes that no matter what tragedy you're in, imagine degrees of horrible that you were spared. Imagine someone's broke. He has to say to himself, look, I'm broke, but my body is functioning. Or if Khalil, a person's very, very ill, you could say, okay, I'm very ill, but I can still see. I could still hear. I keep thinking to myself, yes, my daughter tragically died. She died beautiful. Her face was not disfigured in any way. Yet we went through chemotherapy and radiation, and I saw other children who were not as fortunate. So that the last vision of my daughter was beautiful. We believe that if we could carve out a path to recognize happiness and simcha from tragedy, of simcha mitoch tzara, that Hashem measures our tragedy, kuchut asayra, and sends us signs that He's still with us. And Hashem gave us many signs showing us that He has not abandoned us, and that was a substantial lifeline to healing. As our hosts wrote in their invitation, 2 years ago, I was fortunate to publish a book called Grieving and Healing Through the Prism of Torah, a bereaved parent's spiritual journey beyond pain and grief in memory of Hindi. And that too was extremely meaningful, to be able to put together the yearly Yartzeit Shiurim that I give in Los Angeles in memory of Hindi. And that has been a source of tremendous koyach and gevura. I'd like to conclude, being that it's the Aseres Yemei Teshuvah, and we're before Yom Kippur, and I'm a Cohen, so I'd like to give you all a Birchas Cohen, that we should be Zoicha to see the fulfillment of the Tekabah Shofar Gadol L'Cheruseinu, to hear the great Shofar Gadol as it heralds our redemption, to witness this year the great promise of Tchias HaMesim. We could be reunited with our children. May we be Zoicha that Hashem will see our modest attempts to cope with the deaths of our children and provide us with a siyata d'shmaya and enable us to return to Him, b'tshuva shalema. And may we be Zoicha to emerge from the Yom Adin with a ksiva chsima toiva, bila hamavas lanetzach u'mocha Hashem elokim dima me'al kolponim. As I said at the beginning, we have a text window. If anybody has any comments, they're free to send their questions. You can send it here, or you could send it to Miriam, Chana Devora. No pressure. It's just as good if you don't want to ask. By the way, my email, because I offered the Sefer of Rabbi Yochanan's Bone, I will type it here. bcc4929@gmail.com. And the name of the book, if you want to text me, is Rabbi Yochanan's Bone, Chizuk to the Bereaved Parent. And I'll put that in the box as well. And this way, if you want, I could send it to Chana Devora, and she could send it to everyone else as well. Hold on. Okay, I sent it to Chana Devora. Let me see if I could put it on the group chat. Hold on. No, it's only coming out privately, so I think everyone sees it. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. If anyone has questions or comments or even criticisms, I'm open to it all. I'll wait a few seconds to see if there are any. And if there are none, I thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you. Okay, I see a comment. I'll respond to the comment. I spoke earlier about guilt. I don't want to necessarily repeat what I said earlier, but Hashem should give you koyach to rid yourself of this guilt. It's not your fault. It's detrimental. There's no 614th mitzvah, thou shalt guilt thyself. Are there any topics other than questions? Are there any topics that anybody wants me to address? I've researched this area so thoroughly. Let's see if there are any comments. Thank you. You're welcome, everybody. What's interesting is that people are still joining now. I gave you all my email. Naturally, if somebody wants to direct a question to me privately, they are invited to do so. Okay, a question was asked. If it is predetermined when a person will die, why do we daven on Rosh Hashanah to overturn the evil decree? It's a great question. It's a fundamental question. We know that tefillah tzedakah and tshuva ma'avirin es raya hagzera. There was a Rav in Los Angeles who told me a great analogy, a beautiful mashal. He said that imagine a king has a decree that anyone who is not circumcised is to be put to death. So a man circumcised himself, and thus he avoided the death sentence. By changing ourselves, by elevating ourselves, by doing tshuva properly, by not returning to the same bad habits as the last year, we're in essence creating a new persona, a new person, sort of like a Shinu Hashem, where we change our name to change our mazel. The tefillah has the ability to rip up that gezerah. Sometimes we're worthy, sometimes our tefillahs are always heard, but sometimes the decision has to be no. Didn't mean Hashem didn't listen, but sometimes the answer has to be no. We have to accept what HaKadosh Baruch Hu throws our way with love and not judging Hashem. Speaking of judging Hashem, speaking of judging, when people refuse to be consoled, they need to stay locked in their state of grief, there's a bit of arrogance to that. People say to me, well, I'm going to ask God, I demand from God an answer after 120. There's something to be said about humility in grief. Accepting the Gzar Din with a sense of humility. Another comment to the person who just texted that the transplant for their child didn't come in time. What happened to the tefillos and the tears? Deeply painful question. Chazal say that Hashem keeps a jug up in Shemayim containing the tears of everyone for our tefillos. It might not be applied where we want it to be applied. To give you an analogy, I sometimes ask myself, why on earth did I go through this challenging Nisayon? I keep thinking to myself, one day my children might be faced with a very, very challenging test. Thank God I'm going to be in a position to help them because God steeled my resolve and gave me the strength to withstand that test. The strength didn't necessarily help prevent the tragedy of my daughter's death, but maybe it'll help somebody else, which is another impetus to why I publish and why I speak publicly to bereaved parent groups about reclaiming simcha after tragedy. So Hashem should collect your tears and apply it appropriately. Another question that was asked, how do we deal with your other children's grief? Again, an extraordinary, sensitive question. I'm not sure I really know how to deal with the other children's grief. My wife and I did not turn our home into a shrine. We haven't become obsessive about the death of our child. We try very, very hard to maintain a normal life, if that's possible. But we don't deny the yahrzeit, and when we want to talk about our daughter, it's open game. No one rolls up their eyes. I find that my children sometimes are eager to hear about Hindi. It's interesting that all my children volunteered for Chai Lifeline. All my children went to Camp Simcha as counselors. On one occasion, I asked my oldest son, rhetorically, of course, why would you expose yourself to this kind of hurt after what we've been through? His comment was so beautiful and so telling. He said, Abba, I want to connect with the pain that you and mommy went over Hindi's death. I couldn't breathe. I thought that was such a magnificent way of conveying and emoting and sharing. Okay, comment. The question is, do we think we are in this to better prepare us for the future grief of others? It's an exceptional question. You know, after my father died, my mother remarried Rabbi Beryl Wein, Rechavia, the famous historian and author. And he frequently says, last time I spoke to Hashem, Hashem didn't answer. So we don't know Hashem's master plan. But building on what we said earlier, imagine, just use your imagination. Imagine how the tsaros and the nisyonos that might be down the road. Or maybe indeed somebody in a similar situation will be tested and you'll be there to help guide. Or you might be there to lend a warm shoulder. Speaking of which, not all consolation comes with books and speeches. I had a chavrusa who knew what I was going through, of course. And he decided that we're going to take early morning Shabbos walks through Hancock Park, Los Angeles. We walked for an hour. Many times we walked in silence. Many times when he saw me expressing it during davening, if you know what I mean. Normally I would put a tallis over my head and cry or sob. It's one of the advantages of having a tallis. You can cloak yourself. But he would just come over and put his hand on my shoulder with that light squeeze. I can't tell you how healing that was. That imo anochi b'tzara. Just go out to have a cup of coffee and chill. To somebody who's going through a hard time. That we're not alone. That we're not isolated. That we have friends. That they would reach out if they could. You know, when I pay a Shiva call, sometimes I'm asked to say a few words. But when I was sitting Shiva, it wasn't so much what people said to me that warmed my heart. It was their presence. I took stock of their warmth. And it warmed me, gave me chizuk. I see another comment. Someone texted, I want to accept Hashem's plan. I have Amunah, but I miss my son so much. It's only 3 months. I invested years to save him. How do you overcome the missing person? Another penetrating question. I wish I really had the concrete answer for you. I will tell you that 3 months is early in the game of grief and healing. The New York Times did an article on what constitutes excessive grief. You know, Chazal, our Torah says that there's a time and place for everything. There's the week of Avelus, the 30 days of Shloshim, the year of saying Kaddish. There's a caution not to grieve excessively. Because grieving excessively, sort of, kind of, second guesses God's decision. If Hashem says we're not supposed to grieve excessively, then we ought not to. The New York Times said a 2-year mark is a healthy marker of when the cloud of pain should be lifting on some substantial level. So it's very, very important to be patient with yourself. As I said earlier, patience is really a virtue. And don't be hard on yourself. I myself obsess over the missing chair. The missing chair is a term in litigation when a defendant is not there. We call it the missing chair. Well, in grief, I refer to my daughter's chair at the dining room table as the missing chair. And while others enjoy the Pesach Seder and enjoy the Sukkah Yontif, to me, these Yomim Tovim were laboratories of pain for me. Because it pained me greatly to see families intact. And it was difficult for me to appreciate what I had instead of obsessing what I didn't have. But to be aware of it is one major step towards healing. The pain of missing the child, to me, is your connection to your child. Think about that for a second. The pain is tangible. It's the only thing we have left that's tangible of our child. Yes, we try to medicate ourselves to not feel it, but it occurred to me that if Hashem wants me to go through this test, if Hashem wants me to feel it, then I'm going to go with it. I'm going to allow Hashem to take me on this journey and take me where the pain will lead me. This is for another chat one day, because, and it's actually an article that I'm in the process of writing, of where the pain takes you. It's a place of tremendous purity and integrity and realism. We tend to, soften pain. We don't want to have pain. But if you actually allow the pain to wash over you, instead of fighting the wave of pain, like on the beach, you know that when the wave comes, you try to fight it, it washes you over. But when the cloud of grief comes, to take a deep breath and breathe through it and allow it to take its course. And then, take another deep breath and it'll be restored. Okay. Next comment. How do I not define myself by the grief? It feels so much a part of who I am. It is who you are now. But you're not defined by it. You're still a husband or a wife, still a spouse, still a parent, you're a grandchild. It would have been very detrimental for me as I tried cases, as I litigate, to be operating through grief 24/7. Although I will say that there was a trial when I returned to work, and I was cross-examining a witness, and I had a lot of anger in me. And that's something worth addressing as well. I did have anger in me. I couldn't understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu did this to me. I'm Shomer Torah Mitzvahs. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, davening every morning, vasikin, learning, giving tzedakah. There's plenty of mamzerim in the West Bank running around, terrorists. Go hit them with cancer or a tragedy. So there was anger. The poor guy who I was cross-examining, I impeached his credibility, and he stayed on, and I kept him on the stand for a good 20 minutes as I dissected him. And I brought him to tears. And the judge said, counsel in chambers. He said, what's going on? I explained to him what's going on. He goes, okay, I get it, but cool it. Not in the courtroom. But I'm being honest here tonight, and yes, I had to deal with disappointments and grief. Maybe some define me as the bereaved parent, but I don't function that way 24/7. Hence, I'm not defined by the grief. Although, again, my experience has molded my character in a very substantial way, where now I am substantially stronger and more compassionate and more understanding and more accepting than I was prior to the tragedy. And I hope that addresses your comment. I see another comment, quote from the Chazon Ish. It's not a quote. A local Rav in Los Angeles told it to me. A local Rav who is also a Musbach from the Chavetz Chaim Yeshiva. So if you email me, reminder, I can seek that quotation if it's truly in writing regarding guilt from tragedy. Next comment. A very, very painful comment. My daughter-in-law cut off, I assume it means cut us off, after my son died. Extremely painful. She also tries to keep the kids away. Is this her way of grieving? Financial, we keep her very well comfortable. We pay for all the expenses. Feels like we lost a whole family. Double dose of pain. Wow. It's what I call collateral damage. I have a good friend, recently bereaved. Similar situation. It's not something you could preempt. It's not something that you can prevent. Estrangement on all relationships between spouses, children, happens. There's an added level of estrangement when it's a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law. My thought is that continued contact with her husband's parents could be a painful reminder of her tragedy. I don't know. It's a very delicate situation that requires consultation with experts. I could only say to continue showing love and support in the hopes that she'll come around. I don't know how long ago your son died, but hopefully over time she will return. Another comment. So now I have to feel guilty that it's been 4 years and I'm still grieving excessively. No, don't feel guilty. The New York Times article that I quoted is not the gospel, so to speak. It's an indicator. It's an indicator. That was a majority opinion. There were minority opinions that 4 to 5 years is a healthy marker. Each one has their own ruler and their own barometer. But it also depends on how you define grieving excessively. Grieving excessively is a clinical term. You know, we know it when we see it. Is the person becoming a monster in their life? Are they allowing their depression and grief to spiral into a black hole, into an abyss? You know, I found that observance of the Torah and the mitzvos is a good barometer of how you're doing. Are you still going to minyan? Are you keeping the mitzvahs? Are you still shomer Shabbos? I know a from bereaved parent who chucked it all. Do I blame the person? No, I don't judge the person at all. But grieving excessively is not the same as grieving. Operative word is excessively. As someone said, time does heal. Be patient, it will be good. Next comment. Can the person silence their phone, please, because it's affecting the noise of others? Another comment that someone made is that the person is functional on the outside, but irreparably damaged on the inside. Yeah, I get that. We put on masks. You know, when we all have a face that we hide away forever. Not everyone gets to know how we're really feeling inside. Rebbetzin Youngreis, Allah Shalom, told me that your face is Reshus HaRabim, it's public domain. And that when we walk with a sad face on the street, it's a bar Reshus HaRabim, it's an obstacle on the street. We have no right to do so. We could share our pain, we could share our trauma, we can share our grief with our loved ones, but it's not for the public domain. Not everyone has to see you walking miserably down the street. So I commend the person who wrote, "We're functional on the outside." It's a perceptive comment, and it's real. It resonates truth. We're all functional on the outside. But are we irreparably damaged? I don't believe so. I don't believe we are irreparably damaged. We are scarred. You know, I carry the scar with me. To me, that scar is very, very important. Gives me my edge. Keeps me alert. I also try to remember all the good, but I'm a lawyer. I also remember the bad. I remember the horrible comments, the insensitive comments, or the horrible things that people did to take care of me, to take advantage of me like predators. And I wrote a collection of Lo Nislach V'Lo Nishkach, like Gush Katif, just so that I never soften my memory. I don't want to soften my resolve. It keeps me focused. But that's just me. So no, you're not irreparably damaged. You're scarred, and you take that scar with you through life. Another comment. I want to be in shul on Yom Kippur. I love the davening, but I am a mess. It's so hard with the beauty of the tefillos and the lengthy davening. I was in shul last year and I cried nonstop on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I dread being in shul this year for that reason. I want to stay home and daven privately, but it's Yom Kippur. I should be in shul, very torn. What parent has not felt that? Who wants to face everybody? One of the advantages of going to shul and going to a simcha afterwards is that it forces us to reclaim our place in the world. If it wasn't a halacha, I'd say, go sit on the beach and chill and decompress and do what you need to do. But being that there are halachas involved, where you have to hear shofar, you have to be in shul to ask mechila, there's a indirect benefit to this. The indirect benefit is that it forces us to return. You know, after Hindi's death, I was invited to Hindi's friends' simchas. This is something that we all go through. At first, I rebelled at the notion of me attending my child's friend's simcha. And indeed, the first couple of times was very, very difficult. I felt all eyes were on me. Very uncomfortable. I didn't like the pity party I was getting. Eyes would widen and soften when they would hear me wish them a mazel tov. And I felt like I was sharing the simcha on some level. I sort of wanted, maybe I shouldn't go. I made a conscious decision that I could do things in memory of my child, and I could also do things with her neshama. My daughter never would have missed this simcha. You know, on that note, you know, what do I like about you? You're a bag of skin with some bones and organs in it and some blood. But what do I like about you? It's your neshama that I like. The neshama existed before the child was born. The neshama exists now. Our child is in a different room. I can't see or touch or feel. But the neshama is there, so I decided I'll do things in memory of my child, but I'm also going to do things with her neshama. Don't send me to the doctor. I'm not sipping the Kool-Aid, and I'm not nuts. I'm not holistic. I'm not having conversations with her neshama. When I make Kiddush Friday night, I make Kiddush and I bench all my children. You know, it's interesting, Rabbi Shlomo Brevda told me that while there is nothing that we can physically do to share with the neshama, Orchos Tzadikim says that once the neshama goes up to Shamayim, there's no earthly emotion that they have. There's no, believe it or not, there's no love, anger. It's all neshama. He says he heard a Kabbalah from somebody, not Kabbalah, he heard from somebody that when we hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranges the neshama of our loved one to experience the spiritual vibration and energy of the shofar that we are listening to. So that while we're listening to the shofar on earth, our child is concurrently absorbing or listening, if there is such a thing, to the Kedusha of our shofar in Shamayim. It's one of the reasons I won't miss Rosh Hashanah. It's an opportunity to have a rendezvous with my daughter's neshama. So I think it's very important to force yourself, if necessary, to come to shul, cut yourself slack. Don't be too hard on yourself. You need to cry. That's the place. That's the time and place. You need to go to the bathroom, wash your face, wipe your tears. That's good. How beautiful it is to cry on the Yom Hadin. But don't become a hermit. Don't lock yourself up and avoid interaction. I find that the davening and the Yom Noraim are very healing. I find the davening sings out to me. Don't deprive yourself of the opportunity for a connection with your child during the Yom Noraim. Someone also texted, we're irreparably damaged until Mashiach comes. There is no other healing. Well, the ultimate healing comes with Mashiach. The ultimate healing. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Rofei Lishvorei Lev. He's the healer of the broken heart. And there are interim levels of Nechama that we are privileged to, while we're on this earth. Let's not foreclose that. When I meet people who are farbissen in Yiddish, they're very negative and way too angry, and their suffering becomes their calling card. That's their reason for living. They celebrate their victimhood status. And they say things like, I'll have a good life in the next world because of all these sorrows. I get it. I hear it. I understand it. It's a way of coping with a tragedy. But I believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to live b'simcha. Hashem wants us to continue even after tragedy, b'simcha. And there's no 11th commandment. Thou shalt be farbissen. I see another comment. Can we say Yizkor for our children? I say it for my mother. I don't know the halacha of Yizkor, but I say Yizkor for my daughter. I say Yizkor for my parents. I also say Yizkor for a long list of children who died because I'm close to their parents. So I take it very seriously. I'm probably the longest Yizkor davener on the planet because I've got a whole pad of paper of names, and I want to be maskir their neshamas. So I read every bereaved parent that I come into contact with. I ask for the child's name. I usually say the name because, it's not a forbidden thing to say. Say the name of your child. And I believe it's important to be maskir the child during Yizkor. I don't light yahrzeit candles for everybody because that would be very hot in the kitchen if I did, and the fire alarm would go off. But indeed, my machzer gives you the option of saying Yizkor for children as well, and it's a beautiful thing to do as well, to connect with your child, Nitzrar HaChaim, to say Yizkor for your child on Yom Kippur and on Yom Tov. Okay, you're welcome. Any other comments, questions, observations, criticisms, condemnations? Okay, all good. When you speak publicly, usually you get a shekayach. That's the extent of the way people give feedback. When I speak before non-Jewish crowds, they're much more receptive. They replay everything I said. Usually from crowds, I get shkoyach. Good job. Okay. Anyway, I'd like to just end off by saying thank you to our hosts, our Tapestry. And if you would like more information about their magazine, and the great work that they do, and I really want to say how marvelous their magazine is. You could contact them, and I will post their email down here. Every year on the yahrzeit, I get a beautiful card and a poem. I read our Tapestry from cover to cover. I've plagiarized some of the articles for some of the speeches that I've given. So I'm really, really happy to be affiliated, and it's a great honor and a privilege, and I'm humbled that you allowed me in your home tonight. Wishing you all a Gemar Chasima Tova.